Hello, and welcome to the Emancipated Citizen podcast, where normally we bring to you the stories of some of the bravest men and women out there, fighting for their individuality against authoritarianism and oppression. But today, exceptionally, it's just going to be the two of us, myself, zacaalrayyis.
And me, Benjamin Snow.
Today we are going to be talking about the Israel-Palestine conflict, which has been in the headlines for the past month, during which we've been talking about other things. We've been there's also an upload in there's also a delay in uploads, so that's another thing. But anyway, we do mean to talk about this more and have people with interesting perspectives, with perspectives that are normally not talked about in the mainstream media. Bring people Israelis and Jews who are critical of the Israeli state and possibly a lot of the missteps that they have done. We might talk to people from the other side. So stay for that. But today we're going to talk about the conflict in general and most substantively the different narratives that we have about them, the different stories that different people tell. And I think over time the two sides, which aren't just the Palestinians and the Israelis, I don't think it's ever been that. I mean, it's been expanded over regions, over tribes, over nations, right? And almost everybody feels some sort of connection with it, and people have completely different stories of it. So we wanted to get into that. But before that, I thought we might just quickly go over the background, the historical background of this conflict. I guess as good a time as any to start would be 2,000 years ago, with the destruction of the Second Temple and the expulsion of the Jews from the land of Israel by the Romans.
There was a Jewish revolt while the Romans were at war with Persia, and I believe it was Emperor Titus, who has a very good reputation among Western Europeans, came down on the Jews, enslaved so many that the market for slaves collapsed, and a whole bunch of people were executed in shockingly brutal ways, most notably crucifixion. And despite the risks of being enslaved on a farm or in a mine, and the ancient Latin word for agricultural slave barracks is now the modern Italian word for somebody who has a life sentence in prison. Despite the risk of that or crucifixion, people still revolted in Israel, and that left a diaspora of millions scattered all over Europe.
And not to mention that that before that, Judaism was a religion centered around a temple in Jerusalem, which was destroyed at the time. And this Jewish diaspora, this exodus of Jews, partly also of Christians during the 2nd century at that time, ended in the birth of two religions. Judaism took a completely different form. They don't have priests, they don't have animal sacrifice, they don't have a temple, but it survived despite everything. And during that time, a series of different empires have occupied the region. Right after the Romans, so a series of Islamic empires took control of the region. The last one of them being the Ottoman Empire. So, what happened during the Ottoman Empire, Ben?
Well, they're kind of famous for their religious tolerance, but at the same time, it was an Islamic supremacist empire. Christian boys would be forced to work for the state, whether as soldiers or administrators, and yes, they might potentially become prime minister someday, but people were still forcibly taken from their families at the age of 10 to 12. And Jews had their own place, and towards the end of the Ottoman Empire, in response to pogroms in it was in the Russian Empire of the time, but it's now what I'd think of as modern-day Eastern Europe. a lot of Jews decided they needed their homeland because they were being murdered and raped at almost every Christian holiday. The big one was in the city that's now the capital of Moldova, and leads back to today because when Hamas went into Israel and murdered and raped civilians in their houses and in the streets, it was just like a pogrom. It couldn't possibly have been more triggering. And it led
Yeah,
to the Jewish Land Trust trying to just buy up land in what's now Palestine as a place for Jews to settle in.
yeah, and like during that time, there has been a steady increase, right? At first, it was smaller number, and it started increasing and increasing as Jews were treated worse in different places around the world. And with that increase of Jewish settlers in the region, which mainly came to Jewish land trusts bought by wealthy Jews in the region from Ottoman landlords, and yeah, as a result of that, or in the aftermath of that, there was a lot of conflict between Arab and Jewish communities.
I mean, buying land to make a future country in the U.S., well, difficult. It'd be buying land from individuals who just own the land and the displacement would be minimal. In Palestine at the time, there were big landlords who had lots of tenants, and the tenants had been there for decades, very likely centuries. So all of a sudden, farmers were displaced from their homes because their landlord decided to sell off their land, and the Jewish Land Trust decided they didn't want anybody but Jews living on the land they were buying, despite there not being any Jews trying to move to Palestine at the time. So all these farmers are just displaced into slums.
Yeah, yeah, and it's important to mention that first of all, the idea of creating a state of Israel is kind of an anachronistic way of putting it. Different Zionists at the time had different conceptions of what that might look like, and sometimes it could be as simple as buying land so that your family can go and live safely, and yeah, that kind of buying was happening at the time, right? So yeah, in the aftermath of that, there was a lot of escalation, a lot of violence against Jews, and on the other side as well, of course, and that coincided with a rise in anti-Semitism, which didn't always have to do with this conflict. I mean, in Europe, principally, there were economic problems. There was massive inflation in Germany, for example, and Jews were made to uh, be the scapegoat for that, especially Jewish bankers and Jews who were doing better off than the average person. It was a little bit similar in some areas of the Middle East, but I think principally in places like Egypt, there was the rise of Islamism, which yeah, had this kind of excitement about fighting the West and fighting colonialism and the forces that be at the time, right? With Islamism, there was a lot of violence against religious minorities, not just Jews, Christians, and other religious minorities as well. And within those groups, especially in Egypt, you still see attacks against Christian communities as a result of Islamist ideology there. So that took a foothold in Palestine as well. The British Mandate, that was those yeah, after the Ottoman Empire was defeated. Yeah, a very important leader by the name of Amin al-Husseini, who is named also by the British as the Grand Mufti of Palestine, was aligned with this ideology and started making increasingly inflammatory statements about Jews and their presence there. Yeah, he talked about the way that women dress. He talked about a lot of different things, and yeah, I think it's important to note at this time that when you go this far back, this argument of oh, the occupation, it doesn't have to do with anti-Semitism. Sure, I mean there's more of this element now, but if you see the parallels between what was happening in Egypt, Palestine, and Germany, for example, I think it's very hard to say that oh, none of this had to do with anti-Semitism and genuine xenophobia that the Jewish populations had to deal with even there. So I think this is an an important point to make in terms of fairness.
After the British mandate had been in place and they had to go through a series of governments, for a great description of that, Martyr Maid did a series about it, and History Impossible did a series called The Muslim Nazis that go over the events quite well. To our audience, if you're confused, we had a bit of a data loss here. And eventually the UN partitioned the land into Jewish and Arab sections. Of course, people weren't separated into discrete areas based on their ethnicity. So in 1948, area was split into Jewish and Arab zones, with Jerusalem being left as an international city, and it caused a bunch of the neighboring Arab countries to launch an invasion. And because the Middle East was complicated, you had Jewish pilots, often American Air Force veterans, flying renovated German World War II fighters against American-made planes being flown by the Egyptians. And Israel managed to win, despite all odds being against them. In the process of the war, a lot of the neighboring Arab governments had encouraged Palestinians to leave, thinking to get them out of the war zone. And then they were never allowed to move back. And their descendants are still in other countries today, and if they didn't end up in Jordan, they still don't have citizenship, even if their grandparents were born in the country.
Yeah, and I think it's important to mention as an historical fact. Yeah. Okay. Or let's mention first. Yeah. So yeah, 1948 was a very important year for both Palestinians and Israelis. For Palestinians, they call this the first Nakba, the catastrophe. It was massive displacement. Um, and it's like a day of mourning for the Israelis. It is the time where they won their independence and asserted themselves and their existence as a Jewish state. Kind of a time of celebration, right? I think it's important to mention as a matter of historical fact at the time. There were Arabs that were forcibly expelled by the Israeli forces very directly, and there was also kind of a gradient of different ways that different Arabs have left their homes. Right, some of them just wanted to go to a place without fighting. Some of them were anticipating the reception of Israeli forces and didn't know what they were gonna do. Like it was common at the time, when an army invades a city, there are massacres, there are rapes, and so on. That so there are different reasons why they left. Some of them even at the urging of Arab leaders, right? That they can leave for a while and after they win the war they can return. But after the war, Israel didn't allow the people who left during that time to return to their homes. Over the numbers, over how many were forcibly displaced, in how far it had to do with Israel actively doing it, and whether they left willingly. I think it's important to say that both did happen, right? And that's a matter of historical fact. But yeah, there is a lot of tension and a lot of difference between how different people see this. Right. After that, Israel expands its territory a little bit, but it still doesn't occupy the whole region. 1967, the Arabs launch a different war. Israel wins again. And coming to our current day, the events of October 7th. So on the 7th of October of this year, Hamas, the governing organization of the blockaded Gaza Strip, and an Islamist anti-Semitic terrorist organization, launched an organized invasion of Israel, where they came in on hang gliders, on boats, in bulldozers, through the Israeli border. So yeah, Hamas launched an invasion of Israel, killed a lot of people, took a lot of hostages, and as a response, Israel decided to bomb and invade the Gaza Strip.
And meanwhile, after poking the tiger like they did, Hamas goes down into their private bunkers they don't let normal Palestinians into, and sits there safe while the civilians above them get bombed. And, well, and for some reason, Israel will sometimes call people and say you need to clear all these buildings out because we're about to bomb them. I'm not even sure what to make of that at this point.
Yeah, and there are also reports of people being bombed on their way of evacuating, right? There are reports of entire families being wiped out. At this point, there have been over 10,000 casualties. I believe over 4,000 children have died in this conflict, and of course, mainly by the Israeli side. And I think this brings up a lot of ethical questions, a lot of questions about responsibility, right? I mean, what Hamas did, it was outwardly barbaric. They attacked people in their homes, deliberately targeting them. They attacked a music festival where there were a lot of internationals, people who are partying, listening to music, dancing. On the other hand, I think there is a very good argument to be made that Israel does have a right to defend itself, and it can't just leave Hamas to continue ruling as usual. Right? They invaded your country. You have to strike back. You defend yourself. I mean, for me, that point in itself is kind of clear. But then there's also, of course, something called ethics and laws of war. You can't wipe out entire towns. You can't carry out collective punishment. You can't deliberately target civilians. Yeah, so it's also important to consider in the ethics of war that if you do commit yourself to the stance that a country should defend itself and should go into war, there is not a way to go into war without putting civilians in danger and taking a certain number of casualties into account, and even children that are going to die as a result. At what point does it become just too much? At what point do we start saying this is unacceptable?
Yeah, I mean it's really hard to say, and I think at this point it's kind of unquestionable that Hamas is trying to set up all their bunker system to maximize the number of civilian casualties to get as much sympathy for themselves as possible, even though they're the ones who go poke the tiger for a living.
Yeah. I mean, we're gonna talk about all of that, and honestly, even the monstrosity on the Israeli side, because there are people in the Israeli government openly talking about driving out everyone, about ethnic cleansing, about even dropping nuclear bombs, right?
Yeah.
Um,
And at least
so
anyone
that is incredibly concerning, right?
Yeah. At least anyone think we're leaving Israel off the hook? We're also not going to cover them that much right now, because our next guest knows a lot more about them than we ever will, and can describe them a lot better than we can.
Yeah, so ever since the 7th of October, no, more especially, I have been seeing things on social media from my social groups, from different circles, from acquaintances, from people in my family, from friends. I have Israeli friends, I have Palestinian friends. I know people who are very passionate about the cause on both sides, actually, right? And I am just kind of left speechless at the discrepancy in the narratives and the ways that different people view things, and how sure everyone is that they are on the right side. In the process, yeah, those narratives are building up and up. Those myths are getting bigger and bigger. You have, I believe, a lot of Israelis, even to this day, that would claim that no Palestinians were displaced even during the 1948 war, forcibly at least, at the direct through the direct force of the Israeli forces, which is, yeah, also a matter of historical fact.
And
So
just and just a very stupid
and there
argument to
are
make in the beginning, in the first place, that people
yeah,
left their homes willingly.
well, I mean, some people did leave their homes willingly.
Yeah.
Right? It's not that they didn't have good reasons to leave their homes. Some of them, I have relatives in a country where there isn't a war going on,
Yeah.
so I'm gonna willingly go. That's not an expulsion.
I'd argue though that that's not people choosing of their own free will. They're being forced out of because of military action. I mean, the same way the Ukrainian refugees in Poland aren't there. I wouldn't say they're there willingly. They're just trying to avoid being shelled.
Yeah, but this was a war of aggression going the other way.
Yeah.
All right. It was people on the Arab sides that started this war of aggression at the time. So I don't think you can compare those situations in that way.
No. I'd say on the level of the individual refugee, it's the same situation. On the level of who is responsible, that's different.
Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. So yeah, on the level of personal experience, sure, but I am very sympathetic with the Palestinian cause and their plight, and I think undoubtedly Israel has a very important and a very big role to play here, and a very big share of the responsibility. But there are other actors that are also responsible for the plight of the Palestinians. You have one side saying you kicked us all out. The other side, no, you just left because there was a war of aggression that we didn't even start. And so you can see how different tales get spun there. So yeah, within that context, let's get into the first segment of this, or the first things that we're gonna discuss, which are Instagram reels, which I have saved in a collection for this episode, so we can talk about them. Let's watch the first one.
My mother was born and lived in Nazareth and married my father there in 1932. My father came from Jerusalem. And it wasn't really until about, I would say, maybe 10 or 15 years ago that she told me, it's quite an extraordinary experience that she had. When she married my father, they had to register the wedding. And together, they went to the Palestine government mandatory office. The official there was an Englishman. And my mother said that she watched him sort of rip up her passport. And he, in amazement, my mother said, well, why are you doing this? He said, well, now you'll travel on your husband's passport. And she said, yes, but I mean, why did I have to lose mine in that way? And he said, well, because your place and this card is going to be given to a Jewish immigrant to Palestine. And the idea was that her identity was just by a simple act of tearing up a piece of paper, was taken away from her by a foreigner. And she lived with the consequences of that for 30 years. And then she became, in the 50s, in the late 50s, a Lebanese citizen. And of course, she's not Lebanese, she's Palestinian.
So, Ben, we just watched the first reel on our list. What's your first impression?
My first impression is that, initially the dates all make sense, but of course, this information usually makes sure details like dates are plausible.
In how far do you think the dates are plausible? Because that was actually one of the one of the things that kind of made me hesitate to believe this story at first. And yeah, the more I started thinking about it and trying to look into it, the less I can find about it, the more I got convinced that yeah, this doesn't make sense on any level. But do go on, like
Well, that the mandatory government was in place in 1932, basically.
well, yeah, that part is true, definitely. Yeah, do go
Wasn't
on.
it still a military government in place in 1932?
Well, it was a British occupation. Yeah. So I would assume so. I mean, I think the first point I would like to comment on is the idea that is it like there is a limited number of ID cards in Nazareth for a limited number of people, where if one person comes in, another person has to go out. Was she a property owner, and was this left out of the story for some reason? And then there's this other angle of it, which, okay, you get married and they rip up your passport because you're supposed to travel under your husband's passport and under a patriarchal system, and that might be an injustice of an entirely different kind. But like if a woman doesn't have the right to her own identity, as has been the case historically in a lot of different places, yeah, what does this have to do with Zionism exactly? What is your place is going to be given to somebody else? Is that like, did she own property? Was she a tenant? It seems like she was going somewhere else anyway, right? And also, it bears mentioning that in the 1947 UN partition, Nazareth was considered Arab territory. So, like, even much later, the timeline, like, from this point of view, and considering those details, for me is it doesn't make a lot of sense. Especially, I mean, there's no evidence that Arabs were displaced in that way, kicked out of the country entirely, basically, and from places like Nazareth. And I'm not even sure that this is the claim that's being made there, but for some reason this story is being shared everywhere, and people are taking it as fact, and yeah, quite honestly, it does have all the signs of disinformation there.
Yeah, and what really makes me think it's disinformation is, first of all, as far as I know, the British didn't believe women should be traveling on their husbands' passports in the 1930s. I don't know what year women got the right to vote in Britain, but in the U.S. it was in 1920.
No,
so I don't
mean,
think there
women
would have
in
been shared
Britain, women
passports.
in the Middle East. I mean, women in Britain, women in the Middle East, that's like, there could be different standards. I mean, that part in itself isn't
And I mean,
necessarily
as
implausible.
disinformation too.
Yeah, I mean, that part in itself isn't necessarily implausible in itself, but like, in how far it fits in with the whole Palestinian narrative, it doesn't make sense. So, taking a little break. Apparently, Ben has had some technical issues. So I will be continuing this on my own. So yeah, this is where we're at. We are looking at and reviewing Instagram reels that I have seen from my different social groups and commenting on them. So let's move on to the next reel, and this one is propaganda from the Israeli side. It is a satirical show from an Israeli TV show, and it talks about pro-Palestinian sentiment in American university, queers for Palestine, that kind of thing, and yeah, I mean it's kind of funny. You have there's definitely some resonance there, and I have some points where I do have some issues that need to be addressed. So let's get into it.
On YouTube with Colombia Anti-Semitic News, where everyone is welcome. LGBTQH.
H?
Hamas.
Yeah, I totally sim Hamas.
Yeah.
It's so trending right now.
From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Do you know why it's true? Because it rhymes.
Well, first of all, talking about this first segment, yes, there are certainly chants that get repeated in pro-Palestine demonstrations, symbols and flags and things like that that I do not think is okay. That are absolutely genocidal in nature, and I would say that just because Israelis are in a more powerful position right now, that doesn't make it okay to support the less powerful party in their admittedly unrealistic ambitions for genocide. Yeah. Recently, I did also come across another story about Harvard students uh, signing an open letter, basically blaming the Israeli occupation entirely for the Hamas attack on the 7th of October. As a result, a number of employers, a number of big institutions have made some very grand statements about disassociating from those students and blacklisting them from getting jobs in the future. I mean, I do think the situation is more complicated than that, and Hamas is certainly a genocidal terrorist group that I will unequivocally condemn. At the same time, there is a conversation to be had about the living situations of Gazans that has been going on for decades, and the open air prison, the blockade from Israel, the fact that the majority of people there are unemployed, most people don't have access to clean drinking water, and I am of of the strong conviction that aside from moralizing those acts, we do need to have a conversation about the kind of circumstances that bring people to antisocial behavior. Yeah, and I think another important point to that is the right wing in the West loves talking about cancel culture and the suppression of non-mainstream opinions. That the right wing is smearing people, smearing university students, climate activists as anti-Semites, as genocidal, and so on. I do not think this is okay. Yeah, if we want to talk about cancel culture, this is something that's certainly happening on both sides, right?
Just look at all this toxic Zionist propaganda. Kidnapped in Gaza. Does this look like Gaza to you?
Yeah, but I have no idea what Gaza looks like.
And they're smiling. Do hostages smile? Zionist liars.
Totally sus.
Do they think we're stupid?
Stupid? I major in queer post-colonial astrology. Ew. Jews make the world dirty.
Yeah.
And no, I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm racist fluid.
Exactly.
I do think there is an important distinction to be made between different segments of the pro-Palestine community and the different goals that different people have and the different levels of information that different people have. Yes, we have seen Islamist pro-Hamas activists, anti-Semites, anti-Israeli people, rip up posters of the kidnapped, and it's inhuman, it's insensitive. I think something that does have to be said is that this like more leftist part of the pro-Palestine movement is unfortunately far too tolerant of this kind of symbolism, of Islamist rhetoric and symbolism and so on, and I think if the pro-Palestinian cause is to survive and is to gain sympathy, especially within liberal circles, then let's get our act together, and I think it lies on the Palestinian community, like in the end, to make very strong statements and very powerful condemnations of elements within their movement that are not okay at all. Yeah. I have come across people who, yeah, for example, you'd raise an Israeli flag in a pro-Palestine demonstration, you'd be attacked, you'd be basically kicked out of the group. It's made very clear that this is not acceptable in this context. Now, regardless of what you might think of this specific situation, I think we should expect something similar when somebody raises a Hamas flag. Yeah.
And now for a little break from all this activism, we want to say hello to our BFF,
Bestie freedom fighter.
Abu Fatwa in Gaza. Salam alaikum.
I think anybody who thinks of Hamas as freedom fighters, they're either terrorist sympathizers or woefully ignorant. There's absolutely no excuse for that. Whereby I'm also going to say that I really don't see this kind of pro-Hamas rhetoric, at least directly from this pro-queer, like very leftist circles that are that do show a lot of solidarity with Palestine. I think the most like the farthest that I have seen them go is basically relativizing their crimes, and sure, it's bad, but it's nothing compared to the tens of thousands that Israel has now come to, or the over 10,000 civilians, and so it's as a matter of relation, it's quite marginal. I mean this is the furthest that somebody would go. So I do think to characterize those people as terrorist sympathizers is to miss like at least half of the picture. Anybody who's happy to see children dying, to see over 10,000 civilians being killed that way, to see collective punishment, and to see Israeli officials openly call for genocide and for the emptying of the Gaza Strip of its native population. Yeah, anybody who is for that is absolutely inhuman, and I think even even if you disagree with this or that stance, if you think people are relativizing too much the crimes of Hamas and so on, you don't have to share an ideology with people to recognize their right to dignity and the most basic elements of survival, really. Yeah.
Alaykum as-salam, and inshallah Allah will kill you all infidels.
Thank you so much for joining us. Love the headpiece, the all oppression chic. I wish I just could be there with you.
You can come to Gaza anytime, and we will throw you from the roof, you homosexual dearth.
Do you hear? Bro, want to throw me a rooftop party.
They are so welcoming and inclusive.
So shukran.
I mean, at the core of this whole satirical performance is the idea that, hey, why are you standing up for the rights of a community that as a whole would throw you off a rooftop for being gay? Yeah. Like along the same lines, you see those this meme that's been going around with, you have the sign "Queers for Palestine" next to it, "Chickens for KFC," as though the Palestinian cause is one that is Islamist and anti-queer at the forefront. I mean, Palestinian people have the right to dignity, period. Problematic attitudes that may prevail within this society are simply not a reason to discount those people's right to live in dignity, right? And I think it also bears saying that civil rights struggles and advancements generally happen in a pattern that is parallel with economic development, with education, things like that, right? The issues, the hardships that queer Palestinians have to deal with, they're huge. They're definitely worth paying attention to. Let's just put it this way. I mean, genocide is not an answer to homophobia or misogyny, or bad ideas within underdeveloped and undereducated society. That's no justification for collective punishment. It's no justification for genocide. It's no justification for suggesting to drop a nuclear bomb on Gaza. It's no justification for referring to Gazans as human animals. If you truly cared about LGBTQ Palestinians, you wouldn't be referring to them as human animals. You wouldn't be calling for genocide. You wouldn't be trying to displace them in this way. Do you think the gay people in Palestine are gonna treat you as liberators because you killed their oppressors along with half of their family? So I absolutely do not see a contradiction in being queer and standing up for the Palestinian people.
And you are also very welcome to come here to America.
We will come. First, we finish with Israel, and America is next.
Great! So, I guess we'll see you soon.
Yes, it will be a blast.
Okay. So the final point I would make about this clip is this idea coming from Israeli propaganda that this Islamism that is plaguing Israel right now from Hamas, the problems that they're having to deal with, if not treated with this level of brutality, are going to spread to places like the United States is just complete bullshit. Yeah, we know what those people are motivated by. Legitimate or illegitimate, right? They have a claim over a certain land. They have a beef with the Jewish people, and the only motivations that they would have for attacking America or the West in general is the perception that those entities are bolstering and supporting Israel and giving them blank checks and enabling this kind of behavior, right? To that, I would also say, yeah, if you do displace all the 2 million people who do live in Gaza, chances are those people and the endemic Islamist ideology that exists there is going to spread all around the world because, well, Egypt doesn't want to keep those refugees. They're certainly not going to get Egyptian citizenship. They might be in a position of being permanent refugees, as we have seen in other Arab countries. A lot of those people are going to end up, going to going to Europe, going to America, because they lost their homes and they need a place to go. Whether they're Islamists, whether they're good people, whether they're bad people, the good and the bad, they're all gonna spread out. Unless you're intent on killing every last person in Gaza, the danger of the effects of this ideology spreading beyond those borders does not lie in leaving the population to continue living in their homes. This danger actually lies in displacing them and turning them into refugees all around the world. That's going to have much more dire consequences on America and Europe and the rest of the world. Yeah, like I said, this point is complete bullshit. Israel is not the front line of defense against Islamism. That's protecting the rest of the world. It's only making the problem worse. Going on to the next one. So here, well, there's not much talking in this one, but it is a video of a group of Palestinians protesting in Tampa, USA, shortly after the 7th of October events. Those people are joyfully waving Palestinian flags, and they are playing videos of the massacre that was carried out by Hamas while laughing and pointing and showing it to the police officers. So this is an attitude that is absolutely endemic within Arab communities. Another social media post that I didn't want to directly bring in here because it's more of a private nature, but a woman that I used to know was singing the song to her child in Arabic. It's a it basically means, Palestine is our land, the Jews are our dogs, they've come in and knocked on our doors as beggars, and it's a lot of dehumanizing language, and what does stand out, and the reason why I mentioned this that specific post is just the the way that children are being kind of brought up with this and having those ideas instilled in them. Yeah. Arab children in Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Palestine, before they can even speak, they are being told that Jews are dogs, that they're subhuman, that the only response to their existence is genocide, essentially. Yeah. And quite honestly, with this kind of culture, you just cannot make peace. And I completely understand why, yeah, for the majority of Israeli history, it's been the case that, yeah, you can make the case, hey, we're trying to make peace with you. You just want us all off the land. You want us all dead. You want to kill our children. What are we supposed to do, no? So until Arab communities and Palestinian communities accept the existence of Israel and the Jewish community there definitely isn't going to be peace. Yeah, I think, yeah, that is an important part of the story. And I mean, that story also brings me back to my own childhood, where rhymes and pearls have been repeated to me, and that I have repeated, and yeah, I mean, we really need to stop and start seeing each other as human beings there. This is apparently from Twitter, posted by a person whom I will not name because she doesn't seem to be a public figure. The caption is "Karma is a bitch." This woman, Dunya, posts on October 7th, 2023. My mom is making knafa to celebrate. I cannot. She's been waiting for this one. So, apparently, in celebration of the Hamas terrorist attack. And then, on the 11th of November, my head can't process this. This is a second Nakba, and nothing is being done to stop it. I am so devastated. Which, I mean, I'm also devastated, yeah. What the fuck did you think when Hamas started a war that everybody knows they cannot win and will inevitably lead to retaliation? And furthermore, if you do not see the humanity in people who live on a different side of a border as you, if you rejoice in the death of innocent Israelis out of your stupid tribal mindset, then on what grounds are you expecting the international community and the world to care about Palestinian life now? I mean, it seems to me that this is a two-way street, yeah? If you're rejoicing in the death of civilians on the other side, you are in no position after that to complain that they are rejoicing in the death of your civilians, and that nothing's being done to stop it. So, next up, we have a compilation produced by 5 Pillars showing genocidal Israeli rhetoric, which has been independently corroborated as we will go over afterwards. This is from a Netanyahu speech. You must remember what the Amalekites have done to you, says our Holy Bible. We do remember, and we are fighting. So, this is a reference to a passage in the Bible in which God orders the Israelites, quote, "Now go and smite the Amalekites, utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both men, women, infant, suckling, ox, sheep, camel, and ass." 1 Samuel 15:3. This is a quote from Isaac Herzog, the president of Israel. It is an entire nation out there that is responsible. It's not true, this rhetoric about civilians not being aware, not involved. It's absolutely not true. End quote. So, what does this? I mean, this rhetoric is essentially an incitement against civilians, a call for collective punishment, and a clear violation of the laws of war. I mean, the Israeli government needs to be condemned for that, needs to be sanctioned for that, and the support that our countries are giving out to Israel, like Germany, the United States, needs to be stopped, or at least have conditions put on it instead of being a blank check the way that it is now. Now, here's a quote from Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister. There will be no electricity, no food, no water, no fuel. Everything will be closed. We are fighting against human animals, and we are acting accordingly. End quote. Well, who is receiving the water and the electricity? It's not just Hamas. It's everyone in Gaza. And half of Gaza's population is under the age of 18. So, make of that what you will. Here's a quote from Dan Gillerman, the former Israeli ambassador to the UN. I'm very puzzled by the constant concern which the world is showing for the Palestinian people, and is actually showing for these horrible, inhuman animals who have done the worst atrocities that the century has ever seen. End quote. I mean, it's the same collective thinking. It's the same mentality of collective punishment, and this is how genocide happens. And to go back to Netanyahu's quote, I mean, there's another problem. If you're using the Bible as a basis for your military actions, if the way that you're going about warfare is taken from instructions that are thousands of years old, from religious texts, from times in which warfare was done in this brutal and genocidal way, in which people were enslaved and robbed simply for being born on the wrong side of a border. How is that different from Hamas? How is that different from the Islamic fundamentalists who cite their own scriptures and say, so our Prophet told us, we're commanded to fight people until they bear witness that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger, if you're relying on those ancient barbaric texts, then you don't live in the 21st century. Recently, the Israeli Heritage Minister, Amika Eliyahu, said that Gaza needs to be completely wiped out, that the people there need to be completely driven out, and even suggested the possibility of dropping nuclear bombs on Gaza. For those statements, he has even been suspended from the Netanyahu government, we just talked about Netanyahu and the way he speaks about Palestinians and his absolute brutality. So the fact that we have a level of monstrosity that is even going to be condemned by the Netanyahu government, it should be an indication of just how far down this path of absolute barbarism that Israel has gone. So finally, there is one final post that I wanted to get to, and it is the following. Greta Thunberg is an anti-Semite who dreams of the destruction of Israel. No different on this point from the Islamic Republic or Hamas, but more dangerous. They have a moral superiority in our children's minds. Fridays for Future is the most dangerous youth organization since 1945. Expansive, aggressive, totalitarian. Has an ideology that would logically end in the Holocaust. End quote. Well, that is, this is a statement that is completely out of proportion. I mean, I read this out directly. The real itself is in German. Posted by this individual named Julian Reichert. What I have to say about this is simply Fridays for Future, Greta Thunberg. They made unequivocal condemnations of Israel. Maybe they haven't made enough condemnation to what's happening on the other side, which, considering the scale of it, I can somewhat understand, yeah. And the fact that she's demanding joining a lot of other activists, a lot of people, in demanding a ceasefire, a humanitarian pause of the killings that are happening there. There has been some speculation about like this octopus toy that she had, and people reading into it, the kraken and an anti-Semitic symbol. Greta Thunberg has deleted those pictures and has made very clear that she did not mean anything by it. That was not anti-Semitic symbolism. It was simply a toy that she had. Accusing anybody who criticizes Israel of anti-Semitism, it takes away credence from the actual problem of anti-Semitism that we have in our world. Greta Thunberg, Fridays for Future, those organizations have never said anything against Jews. And quite honestly, whether you're in the right or you're in the wrong, if you are taking actions of war, if you're taking actions that result in civilian deaths, you really should have the insight to take criticism of that, even if your cause is justified. I mean, first of all, the philosophy of complete pacifism, I don't think is defensible, and from that, I think it's also reasonable to say anybody who is put in a situation where they have to take actions of war, start a war, has to take into account civilian casualties. There is a horrible cost that is always connected to war, and you should have the insight. You should be able to understand the horror and condemnation that some people are going to have against that, even if they are wrong, and without accusing them of prejudice, racism, and anti-Semitism, because those accusations simply don't help anyone. You want to defend your cause, defend it on its own merits. Defend the actions of Israel on their own merits. Tell me why the use of white phosphorus on civilian areas is justified. Tell me why the bombing of refugees as they flee their homes at the direction of the Israeli Defense Force is justified. Tell me why over 4,000 children had to die. There could be conceivably justifications for everything. If you don't think it's possible, it's probably just a lack of imagination there. Yeah? Quite honestly, like when it comes to the invasion of Gaza after the horrible attack that Hamas carried out, I mean, sure, on the one hand, this terrorist organization invades your country and kills so many people and causes so much horror there. And especially considering that there are all those sanctions and blockades, and in that regard, you can't do much more. Yes, a ground invasion, a complete occupation of the territory held by Hamas in this context, Gaza, does seem like a necessary course of action. But there are a lot of things that are done in the process which, absolutely do not belong within a justified course of warfare. And quite honestly, whether there should be a ceasefire, whether there shouldn't be a ceasefire, whether there should be talks with Hamas, and that's very difficult. Yeah, I'm not gonna sit here and pretend like I have all the answers. But I think it suffices to say that when a civilized democracy in the 21st century wages a war on a justified basis, there has to be some restraint. There have to be measures taken to protect civilians, even if you can't avoid civilian casualties completely. Civilian collective punishment and ethnic cleansing, that's not an answer to anything, and those are not legitimate means of war. This is an issue that has affected me in ways that, I mean, I don't want to get into a lot of specifics when it comes to my career, when it comes to the positions that that I've lost or whatever, and this isn't even about me. This is just a microcosm of how people are splitting into camps in such a terrifying way that I don't think I've ever seen in my whole entire lifetime, yeah. I don't think I have ever in my entire lifetime seen a societal split as ruthless and as aggressive as this one. People are losing friends and family members for not positioning themselves extremely enough on one side or another. This might just be another side effect of the media sphere that we live on now, the social media, the algorithms, the spiral of extremism that has been talked about endlessly by so many people. The incentives that exist within mainstream media maximize drama and conflict and constantly bring on some Hamas sympathizers and people who are calling for the complete extermination of Palestinians or Gazans, and we're not hearing any of the reasonable voices. We're not hearing any productive discourse. We're not seeing the building of solidarity and discussion groups between Arabs and Jews and Israelis and Palestinians. I think, at least in principle, it is possible. I think I know enough reasonable people, at least, to bring on this podcast and reasonably to make a final statement on this whole tragic situation. I will read a sign from a protester spotted in Berlin, which says Jewish safety and Palestinian freedom are not opposing causes, and there is no reason they need to be, except for the warmongers and demagogues on both sides. They are the true enemies. They are the true villains here. And with that, stay tuned. We're going to continue this discussion on our next episode. Take care, everybody. Bye.